Admiral Crix of the Zorn Empire stood on his flagship's bridge, gazing at the bureaucratic nightmare. His tentacles twitched in a holographic display with all four of his eyes. Excitement as he went over the initial scan data of the unimpressive solar system, they recently found that the third world appeared especially suitable for conquest, with a standard environment, good resources, and indications of a rudimentary civilization. The supreme leader of victories of moderate importance, and is required by law, Assistant Plick declared using his entire title. 7,249 be with my outer eyes rolled. I've filled out the customary pre-invasion assessment form 3 times. Continue with your report, Junior Assistant to the Supreme, while his inner one stay fixated on the display. Flick, a third-class commander with relatively significant conquests, clicked his exoskeleton while consulting his data pad. The species, which identifies as human, has attained basic space flying, but they haven't extended past their lunar satellite, and their worldwide military is split up into several groups. And their most sophisticated weaponry continues to use rudimentary atomic weapons and chemical propulsion. Devices are primitive, in fact. Have they attained the 5 signs of civilization? Let me look at the official checklist, species. Plick mentioned creating a new datapad for the Unified Planetary Administration. Evidently, negative telepathic consensus. Sharing is not quicker than light travel. Tentacle development is extremely dubious. They seem to have only 2 upper appendages. How dreadfully ineffective, Crick said. Casually juggling 3 data points. Commander signing requisition paperwork, using his major tentacles and the 5th sign, while using pads with his auxiliary tentacles, standardized bureaucratic practices. In every sphere of society, mandibles clicked in amusement. But we shouldn't hold such a young species to high standards. How dangerous do they think they are? Plick reviewed a 3rd datapad, this one bearing the official seal, for rating purposes, of the Division of Threat Assessment and Document Processing. As per, they are classified as a Class D civilization on the Galactic Conquest Difficulty Scale. Appropriate for common conquest procedures with little anticipated pushback. Imagine the small promotion this simple victory would bring. And perhaps he'd finally earn it, suggested the superb cricket player. The authority to amend his title to include the outer ring areas in order to prepare the regular invasion documentation. And remember to include the X, 27Q this time. I'm still receiving memos from the Department of Proper Form Filing Procedures regarding that supervision, which has already been completed. With pride, Commander Plick produced a stack of documents that came to him. Thorax, I've decided to finish the environmental impact research that was conducted before the takeover. Mildly hostile intent declaration and planetary reorganization application. Crix accepted the permission very well, pointing out how his assistant had arranged the documents according to color, size, and quantity of mandatory waiting period, necessary signatures, and the typical 3 solar cycles as stipulated in Section 12, Subsection 7 of the Bureaucratic Code of War Footnote 9. Paragraph 4, Subparagraph 2. Crick took a seat in his command chair. Great send, letting his tentacles unwind in their proper holders. We would prefer not to overburden them with our usual warning probing, which may be as easy as a crop circle or 2. Superiority just yet. CCS stared at the blue as Plick scurried off to file the required documentation for probe launch. With Green Planet on his screen, a straightforward conquest would be a nice departure from their previous endeavor. Invasion, in which they were forced to withdraw after learning that the target species had become proficient in administration. He ordered the filibustering computer to start keeping an official log. On the first day of operation, he stopped, and then proceeded with the primal operation of satisfaction. Given that we annexed that planet of non-sentient rubber trees, this acquisition should be the simplest conquest. Admiral Crick is aware of this. Yet he just committed the biggest administrative error of his career by neglecting to submit the previous Z99X. It was simple to forget that the form was filed under the assessment of species, with perhaps erratic defense mechanisms. Various alerts regarding strange items in the vast archive of possibly pertinent records and people, as the Zorn Empire was on the verge of learning that the 3 solar cycles were nothing less than strange. Admiral Crix was learning later on in the bureaucratic nightmare that people had the bothersome habit of not. What do you mean that they destroyed our warning probe while adhering to the correct invasion protocols? He wanted all Plick has 4 eyes on him, which is obviously against Section 3 of the Basic Victims Code of Conduct. Well, sir, Pick remarked anxiously, rearranging his datapads so that it seems they interpreted our crop circle statement as indicating that, based on their intercepted communications, some farmers were under the influence of alcohol that free time prevented us from following the recommended geometric designs that are precisely as described in the 47th edition of the Manual of Ominous Warnings. The ship's communication system suddenly came to life, and a surprisingly informal voice filled the "Hello, aliens. This is Dave Martinez, the left-hand commander. We apologize for your probe issue. But Earth's unified space defense sort of has a shoot-first policy when it comes to no ill will, unknown objects entering our atmosphere, and the tentacles of Crick twisted in what is the appropriate way to reply to an unapproved casual greeting check. This is unclear, Plick." Supreme Commander Plick hastily flipped through a huge tome marked "Proper Responses to the Manual. Inappropriate attempts at contact. Hey, are you still there?" Martinez's voice returned. "We can fully cover the damage if it concerns the crop circles. However, to be honest, your circles might use some. This is Admiral Crick Supreme. My children's geometry homework appears more menacing." Crick has finally found his voice. Commander of quite significant conquests, you will immediately stop this casual correspondence and submit to Martinez chuckling and holding his breath, saying, "Oh man, you're really trying to invade. Let me put Dr. Matthews on the line. She is passionate about this." Before Crix could object to this additional protocol violation, another voice joined the Chief of Unconventional Defense, Dr. Helen Mad Dog Matthews. "I have a lot of questions, starting with how you created crop circles that precisely match the Fibonacci. Is that dubstep we're obtaining from your spacecraft? We've been examining them for days. If you're entering Earth music already, we ought to completely stop the Crix thundering. Plick uses intimidation, which is not how initial contact before planetary conquest is meant to go." Supreme Commander Blick confirmed, filling out the required paperwork as the fleet is now deploying. Deployment forms while attempting to block out the constant flow of informal dialogue from Earth's best ships darkened the skies as they maneuvered into attack formation, their ominous shapes in a spectacle that had immediately led to the surrender of innumerable civilizations. "Nice," said Dr. Matthews. "Are you seeing this, Dave? Their spacecraft are the geometric implications alone, aligning themselves in a flawless hexagonal arrangement. Yes, save the Helen Martinez interrupted the math class, but notice how they're lining up exactly with the assignment. I've been eager to test it out, Boomerang. So should I give the order?" Absolutely. Prior to Crix being able to demand an explanation for this strange discussion, a number of his strange impacts were reported by ships to the Supreme Commander and his fleet captain. Yelled that people were throwing crude projectiles at us. Protective shields arrogantly mandated that no antiquated weapons could get past their sophisticated technology, sir, the captain said, sounding perplexed. Projectiles are returning for a second and third blow without halting. On the command screen, Crix watched in terror as his ship's shields failed to obliterate Earth armaments. Just continued to circle back for more hits, getting faster with each pass. The well-planned fleet formation started to disintegrate as ships attempted to avoid the never-ending bombardment that fascinated Doctor. The kinetic amplification is performing much better than our simulations, and Matthew's voice broke through the confusion. "I hope you don't mind, but we're documenting all of this for scientific purposes." Crix sputtered. "This is impossible. Please tell me how to reply to physically impossible weaponry." "I apologize, but I don't believe Supreme Commander Plick responded while buried beneath a mountain of falling data pads. Martinez said pleasantly, "We have a form for this. Would you like us to stop? We'd love to test out more defense systems, but if you'd rather, we're okay with calling it a day." Crick's tentacles dropped in defeat as he tried to talk things out, perhaps over coffee. Observe what seemed to be glorified space, methodically destroying his powerful fleet. Boomerangs ordered a tactical retreat, and someone lodged a formal complaint. This kind of defense strategy shouldn't be used by the Department of Standardized Warfare. Crix thought he heard Dr. Matthew yell as the bureaucratic nightmare left Earth orbit. We have a lot more experiments to conduct, so we'll be back soon. The Admiral slouched in command. Chair, all four eyes went down in horror. This was going to take a lot of Admiral Crick completed 3 days of forced meditation following the Boomerang debacle, as mandated by the Zor Empire's procedures for handling unforeseen military setbacks. He came out of as he said, Plick, consider a pod with a revelation energy, who had been methodically arranging the documentation of the feats that mankind must have found in the Zor, a strong energy source that powers their erratic defense. Capabilities. Surveillance teams diligently keep an eye on Earth's communications and patterns of behavior. Following a week of observation, Plick eagerly waved a datapad as he stormed into Crick's office. Supreme Commander, we have discovered the source of their power. It seems that humans rely on an enigmatic black liquid. They call it coffee, and they drink enormous amounts of it prior to any major military operations. Or else, according to our analysts, their efficiency decreases by around finally, a weakness we can take advantage of. 78.3% of Crick's tentacles wriggled with delight. Create a Form D-455 application for strategic resources using the appropriate administrative procedures. Meanwhile, on Earth, Lieutenant Commander Martinez was enjoying his 4th cup of coffee in the morning when Dr. Dave Matthews stormed into his office, and our satellites just detected something strange. Activity in all of Earth's major coffee-growing regions. The aliens have returned. Cool. Martinez said, Take him before we deal with it. I want to have another sip of coffee. I've already had 6 cups. Admiral Crick started Operation Bean Denial, which involved deploying the crop while observing time above Earth's atmosphere. Elimination rays target all coffee plantations worldwide, depriving them of their valuable energy supply, forcing Zor ships to intentionally position themselves over Earth's coffee-growing zones, charging them. However, they overlooked the fact that their senses had been adjusted for the agricultural disruption beams. Incorrect kind of bean. Sir Plick stated anxiously that there was a problem with the aiming. Instead, they're locking on to all of the world's legumes. The rays continued with the procedure after dismissing the minor detail cricks. Every soybean, peanut, and lima bean plant on the planet briefly radiated an ethereal light. And then instead of as planned, they started to wither, yet they grew extremely quickly. Dr. Matthews Martinez called over the emergency line, while enormous beanstalks started to spiral upward toward the Zorn spacecraft. Could you possibly confirm that this is past me that pot, please? This is just another of your experiments, and I hope it's far superior to anything I've thought of Dark Roast, which I must record. The Zorn fleet became involved in enormously expanding vegetation, but much worse. The rays had an unforeseen engagement with the coffee bushes. They succeeded in striking them, but rather than destroying them, they produced a new a terrified supreme commander of a caffeinated hybrid species officer stated that our ground crews conducted emergency landings and discovered some they mistook the altered coffee beans for emergency supplies. And Crix watched in terror as live feeds depicted his soldiers having their first cup of coffee. Were filing reports at a rate that threatened to bring down the Empire's economy, dashing around at previously unheard of speeds. Bureaucratic structures, and suggesting more drastic changes to their standard operating procedures. Sir, according to Plick, Officer Zenak recently proposed cutting the number of copies of our standard forms from 12 to 3. Additionally, he utilized an ink hue that was not permitted, which caused the terror Crix to gasp. Procedure 7B. Emergency evacuation of people exposed to unapproved chemicals that increase efficiency, but it was too late for the impacted troops. Previously established a committee to expedite the withdrawal process, reducing the amount of necessary documentation. By 60%, I'm seeing previously unheard of levels of output, Dr. Matthews said. Additionally, I believe that some of your guys have created a new type of mathematical notation. I would like to see before the bureaucratic nightmare spreads. Negative, Crick said. Retreat, retreat, all units. Martinez and Matthews started from their office window as the huge bean vines behind it escaped once more. Martinez asked as he poured his 10th cup of coffee. We tell them they missed all the energy drink manufacturing plants. Matthews said, No, let's save it, as her coffee cup was strangely already empty. I have some ideas on how their rays might interact with Monster Energy back on his planet for their upcoming visit. Slumping at his desk with incident reports all around him, Ship Crick Plick reminded me to submit an update to the Directory of Recognized Dangerous Chemicals. I'll add this coffee thing as soon as I've finished evaluating these 3,000 proposals for Class 1 warning. Our caffeinated troops proposed procedural modifications, to which Plick responded with his own. He labored at an unparalleled pace, his tentacles twitching suspiciously. Did you realize we may lower our standard? If we only combine the first documentation, the invasion timeline would be shortened by 47%. The only thing Crick could do was slam his head into his desk, pushing aside yet another pile of Enzor space. Admiral Cricks had to do the most feared thing he had ever had to do in his career: give a PowerPoint presentation to the using the High Council of Bureaucratic Warfare to explain his tentacles and failures, as you can see from Flowchart 7B. He shuddered as he clicked to the following slide, pointed to an incredibly intricate diagram that shows how humans seem to work on a system. We're referring to it as organized chaos because they continuously succeed by disregarding any sensible protocol. Do you mean to tell us that Counselor Vex doesn't even file their defense? Their eye stalks trembled in disapproval, tactics in triplicate before putting them into practice. And worse, Cricks responded they seemed to improvise, and then the chamber resonated with a collective gasp. Despite the noise of multiple counselors submitting applications for stress leave, CRIC went on. I've quickly created a solid plan that will implement using the book Tactical Unit. The 5th Bureaucratic, while Dr. Matthews is on Earth, the Infantry Division is extremely methodical and files paperwork for filing paperwork. Was making a presentation to the United Earth Defense Council of her own, albeit required a lot more coffee and hand-drawn drawings. So she essentially described it by pointing to a sketch of what seemed to be a cat in a rocket suit. And I discovered what makes them so crazy that they are incapable of handling anything that you request 3,000 because it doesn't suit their classification schemes. Martinez inquired about rubber ducks while going over her most recent purchase forms. I also needed them for my bath, but the 5th Bureaucratic Infantry Division arrived primarily for science. Enters Earth's orbit precisely on time, having submitted all necessary 847 in order to show off the superiority of props. They positioned their ships in textbook formation prior to the invasion. The military protocol they came upon contradicted all of the manuals in their database, and the Supreme Commander, according to the division's head, the humans are breaking at least 15 of the basic warfare standards. CCS watched in horror as they deployed what looked like Earth aquatic toys that were painted to resemble our ships. Swarms of rubber ducks equipped with miniature propulsion devices and neatly painted, Enzor Imperial colors flew about. Don't let his fleet divert your attention. It's obviously a primitive attempt at psychological. The Imperial March is squeaking as another officer cuts in. Sir, but they're not even adhering to the correct squadron formation patterns, and the tempo is completely off. Dr. Matthews' voice crackled over. I got the notion while taking a bath by saying, Hey guys, I like our decoy fleet. Did you notice what they're leaking? He was horrified to discover that the rubber ducks were spreading some according to his ship's investigation. Some sort of liquid in space presently seems to be soap. Sir, but the bubbles are refracting our scanning beams, which isn't even helping our sensor arrays. Crick exclaimed, Neither is your artificial gravity, to which Matthews cheerfully answered, But that's scientifically possible. Doesn't prevent it from functioning. Yeah, watch this next segment. That's my favorite soap opera. The Zor ships inside each bubble were surrounded by a crystalline network as the bubbles started to freeze in the vacuum of space. Thousands of looping cat videos appeared as small holographic projections, alerting the division chief. Yelled out that the crew is becoming sidetracked by the cat's output and that someone has just stated, or during a fighting scenario, Sir Click interrupted. and I think I located the pertinent rule. He displayed a dusty tome with the title Really Strange Things for this case. Possibly, but most likely not, Volume 37. In accordance with paragraph 12, subparagraph, Q had to divert our attention. When he came across weapons in Massachusetts, Martinez's voice interrupted. Hey, if you like cats, wait until we introduce the Roomba to see what happens. What Crix asked the squadron shortly before his sensors picked up hundreds of there is not enough time to file a suitable response when tiny disc-shaped objects emerged from Earth. Once the division leader became agitated, they simply bounced around without adhering to any known attack strategy. Plick screamed. Randomly, they're cleaning drones. As he observed the room bars affixing themselves to the hulls of Zorn ships, although they are transgressing all established principles of systematic Matthews, added that we discovered your targeting systems are unable to lock onto space navigation. I hope you enjoy the 21st century, which is everything that moves entirely impulsively and plays music while they work. Soon, the noises of babies filled the bridge of every Zor spacecraft. Sharks, as the room bars sometimes carried on with their frantic dance in space, slamming into one another and making happy beeping sounds to express regret. A record number of CGGs complained about how to submit combat reports when the enemy's strategies don't match any recognized. Martinez said, "You don't have anyone up for a coffee break." The fifth bureaucratic. That's the cool part about the classification. Extreme administrative disarray ultimately prompted the Zor Empire's Infantry Division Pride to retire. With failure to keep accurate records of combat incidents, various after crews became too distracted by cat videos to keep their ships in service. Ships had to be towed back. Dr. Matthews was already organizing her next innovation back on Earth. What are your thoughts, Dave? I assumed we had agreed to respect the weaponized dad jokes when Martinez looked up from his coffee. Although the Geneva Convention is fine, I will continue to use the tap dancing space room. Admiral CCS faced a pivotal moment in his career following the rubber duck incident. The High Council had given him a warning to conquer Earth or risk being sent to the department of he informed his audience that the perpetual paper pushing the time for following the right processes is over. A pile of invasion permit applications is being torn up by the command staff. We're going to take action, Sir Plick inquired anxiously. Unprecedented, something so shocking it will go down in Zor history. Several juniors were about to improvise when the word hung in the air like a forbidden curse. Martinez was exposing Dr. Matthews to the idea of a weekday morning without imminent danger when cops fainted on Earth. When their systems blazed with a tree of holy quantum fluctuations, it was an alien invasion. They're back. And are they flying in a non-geometric formation? That's not. Matthews spit out her coffee. For the first time, Martinez expressed genuine concern about the regulation, believing that we destroyed them. The Zor fleet swarmed into Earth in utter disorder, with ships flying at arbitrary angles, no documentation submitted, and not even a single crop circle warning. Admiral Crick's voice echoed across the room, attracting human attention. We are no longer adhering to the conventional invasion protocols at all frequencies, and our actions will be fully. Dr. Matthews and Martinez looked at each other. Should we inform them about our erratic fear and spontaneity? Let's give them a minute, Martinez said. Matthews responded by filming everything for her alien study thesis. The Zor fleet's concept of human tactics is a comedy of mistakes. Since unpredictability turned out to be problematic, they attempted to play their warning sirens in shuffle mode, incorrectly filed their attack papers in the appropriate files. One ship even activated its strobe lights without completing the essential lighting request as the ships performed. Archives Cricks were announced. What they thought was a random pattern of attacks turned out to be an ideal illustration of the Fibonacci sequence. We are currently using entirely unplanned tactics that we carefully prepared. Matthew's CED is making a concerted effort to think creatively. Seeing a child learn to walk at the child were a huge bureaucratic empire trying to influence, speaking about battle. Martina remarked as he looked at his tablet. Remember that thing. Matthew's eyes illuminated the object that we were not supposed to accomplish, because it might violate multiple laws of physics. Dr. Matthews smiled widely, but the ethics committee was having lunch. Initially, millions of people worldwide activated their smart home systems, wireless devices, and synchronized game consoles, speakers, screens, and other digital devices. The entire planet rickrolled for a single, spectacular moment of well-coordinated pandemonium. What are these jerks demanding? Zorfleet. They're never going to give you up, blasted. Every communication line has some sort of archaic acoustic weapon, sir. Pisuke pointed out that the group was dancing without turning in the appropriate forms for recreational activities. The Zor fleet's meticulously planned pandemonium descended into real anarchy as crew members discovered their ships started to drift out of formation as their involuntary transition to the rhythm. It isn't the intended method of irregular warfare for pilots to try to moonwalk at their stations. Subconsciously swayed his tentacles to the rhythm, wailing, like we were meant to be the unpredictable one, is that you can't outwear the music since Matthew's voice cuts through it. Species that created competitive hot dog eating competitions and social media reality TV. But points for Cricks objected, saying that trying this is against the fundamental principles of engagement. Your assumption that we read the handbook was brave. Martinez responded, now, regarding those dance moves, you might want to file an injury. Your crew's attempts to prevent the Macarena from becoming deadly reached a breaking point when viral cat videos featuring a screaming goat were released by Earth's Mimetic Warfare Section as their secret weapon. The Zor fleet's computer is accompanied by sounds and footage of infomercials depicting people struggling with simple chores. Ships began to crash as systems tried to classify and file this attack of pure human randomness. As their navigation computers attempted to calculate the logical pattern in infant Yoda, they spun in circles. As he watched his powerful armada disintegrate, memes ordered a full retreat. The collective craziness of humanity is attacking, and someone needs to stop Lieutenant Zix from attempting to recreate what Martinez inquired while watching the Zor if we should pursue that dance challenge video. They fled in what they likely believed to be a random pattern, but Matthews retorted that it was actually a perfect conga line. She's already gathering information for her upcoming study, so I believe they've learned their lesson. In addition, I need to patent these weaponized memes before the bureaucratic nightmare stumbles ahead of me. Slumping on his command chair, the Zorn space crick was defeated, not by superior technological or military prowess, but rather by humanity's capacity to use its own, he said, rigidity pleek. Prepare Form Z78-9Q admittance of total and total inability to understand enemy species. Sir click in an attempt to conceal the fact that he was still humming. Never going to give you up in the background. I added a new category defeat by subclass of cultural warfare memes. A goat yelled. Lessons learned. In the distance. One standard galactic year later, Admiral Crick made his final appearance before the High Council of Bureaucratic Warfare. Delivering his thorough report while comprehending the inexplicable study of human defensive mechanisms and the reasons we should ignore them, he said, pointing to his last slide that, in some way, included a pie chart and a photo of a cat riding a Roomba, which I formally suggest deeming Earth a Class X civilization, since it is too strange to achieve a new classification High Council of X observed. But do you realize how long it has been since we established a new civilization class? 12,000. Years? Something that would need less documentation than another unsuccessful invasion, Plick grumbled, occasionally under stress, bursting into impromptu dancing steps while on during her address to the United Earth Defense Council. Dr. Matthews included much more film of explosions and coffee stains, so she essentially clarified by indicating a whiteboard with mathematical formulas and drawings of extraterrestrials performing the Macarena. We've effectively used human unpredictability, our biggest vulnerability, as a weapon, proved to be our strongest suit, and the beanstalks that were fueled by coffee are still developing, according to someone. Martinez responded, on the plus side, the International Space Station has had to issue warnings to low-orbit satellites. They recently opened a window back in Zor Space to High, and station hasn't had to pay for coffee in months. At last, the Council decided that Earth would be placed in Class X, with a special addendum approach at your side effects of personal risk could include unexpected dancing, administrative confusion, and caffeine addiction, although the first formal cultural exchange program between Earth and the Zorn was launched 6 months later. But the narrative didn't end there. Empire started, but after they gave up attempting to take over the world. It turned out that the Zors were actually very cool. Dr. Matthews was named the ambassador of science to Earth, a role she established and pushed for. Her first act, in spite of several objections to the title's professionalism, was to introduce the idea of casual Martinez, creating a small revolution in dress code restrictions by introducing Fridays to the Zor bureaucracy. Star Jumps is a network of interstellar coffee shops that gain notoriety for serving the strongest caffeine on Earth. Mixtures to unwary extraterrestrial species. The activity of the final product increases throughout the galaxy resulted in the establishment of support groups for Bureaucrats Anonymous. Admiral Critic, much to his amazement, he was elevated to the position of Supreme Commander for comprehending strange things that shouldn't work, yet he managed to decorate his workplace with a cat and rubber ducks. Posters become a must-see for every extraterrestrial society thinking about Earth. Invasion. He would offer prospective invaders video of the legendary rubber duck fight between humans. Seemed to follow a concept known as intentional absurdity. They've somehow turned the majority of guests fled his office when they turned their blatant disrespect for protocol into a valid defense tactic. Looking perplexed but persuaded, particularly after he played the tap dancers' classified video for them. Buzz Plick is currently the Supreme Commander of Understanding's senior assistant. Strange things that shouldn't work, but still managed to keep his appreciation for suitable papers. But he claimed it helped and became accustomed to adding little sketches to formal forms. Avoid administrative boredom because Earth's reputation is wide. Other civilizations in the galaxy started researching human culture in an effort to comprehend how a species could be both so effective and yet chaotic at the same time, according to multiple alien study articles, were released with titles such as memes, the ultimate strategy and the strategic advantage of not having a strategy. The Galactic Standard Encyclopedia's entry on Earth was modified to include a psychological weapon, generally innocuous, yet when provoked, quite unpleasant, noted for using practically anything as a weapon, such as cleaning supplies and waterfowl-shaped bath toys. Proceed with caution with a sense of humor, and a squadron of coffee-powered maintenance roomers continued their work in deep space. The fact that the eternal dance continues to play Baby Shark on repeat is evidence of humanity's distinct strategy for defending the galaxy. Dr. Matthews had the final say, as typically. She did this upon accepting the Nobel Prize in extraterrestrial relationships. We ultimately didn't require the largest weapons or the swiftest vessels. Simply had to be ourselves, weird, erratic, caffeine-dependent beings who transformed uncertainty into a creative form as well. I'm fairly certain that anyone has seen my rubber duck army. The galaxy would never be the same when they attained consciousness and started planning something. But perhaps that was for the best. After all, if you can't enjoy yourselves, what good is intergalactic civilization?